When it comes to the story of Toji, this might be one of the greatest stories in terms of anime, in terms of just the contradiction of someone, but also the story of a man who believed that once he was able to achieve his goal, his life would be so much better and he would have better direction. But by the end of it, he didn't have direction. And before he knew it, he was just a man who was chasing cheap thrills to just feel alive before he ultimately loses his life to Gojo. But before we get to what actually happens to Toji at that point, let's take it to the beginning. And oh, side note, I am not no JJK deep channel. I'm just a dude who watches the anime. I've read a bit of the manga, but I'm also having fun in terms of just breaking down characters and different aspects. I did an All Might one if you're interested, but just talking about anime characters a lot, just the psychological aspects, the mental things, I enjoy it, right? So I'm just sharing it with you. Just, take my things with a pinch of salt.
Because I'm still waiting for you to click that like button and to subscribe and the post notification button.
But in terms of Toji's story, we know that this is a man who was born within the Zenin clan, a clan that is really obsessed with curse techniques to the point that it seems like your curse techniques can even dictate where you are in your social standing or just how you're viewed. This is very important because, as we know, Toji, didn't really have one like that. But as we know, he has a brother. Now, this is a problem for Toji because, as we know, this is someone they can compare Toji to because he doesn't really have a curse technique. Now, the thing that's really interesting about Toji is that Toji seems to be an individual who has it out against the clan. But something interesting that I found in terms of the story of Toji is you need to ask yourself, how did this failure, so to speak, at this point for the clan make it to the point where he could eventually get his heavenly restriction and become the Toji that we know? That means that within the clan, he was protected, he was taken care of to a certain point before things just got extremely extreme. Now, what this could possibly be, now these are just hypotheticals, it could be a possibility that maybe they viewed him as a late bloomer, that his curse technique was gonna develop way later, or, I believe that it takes time actually for people's curse techniques to develop properly or show the signs. So I think that he had an initial period from being like a baby to a certain point where they looked at him and they were like, okay, I don't know, but maybe he might be something, until eventually it gets to a certain point where they're very certain that, okay, he's a failure. That's just what they believe, that he just does not have it, especially because there's someone to compare, which is his brother, who does have a curse technique. But the thing is, by the time he gets to that point, you gotta think about it. The best he can be is maybe a top foot soldier, an individual who might be used by the clan in some aspect, but for his family, he's a mark of shame because he's a failure, and at best, he's the leader of just normal dudes, basically. And a fun fact that I always like to think about, because people tend to compare Toji and Maki, which is understandable because it's there for a reason. They have similarities. It's put in the anime and story for a reason. I actually believe that Maki went through it worse than Toji, mainly because of the fact that dude is a dude, Maki's a girl. And as you can see within the clan, it's bad enough not having a curse technique. But then the fact that they're also high-key sexist adds way more onto it. And as such, you have to think about the lives they lived. So Toji had it bad, but not as bad as Maki. But either way, there's a point where things get really bad. And he starts to develop and become more colder as an individual, and also just becomes as useful as he can be, which is why he has a lot of martial arts abilities and he's capable. He's learned things similar to Maki. But eventually, he gains his heavenly restriction. And this is something he's been waiting for the longest time because, and I said this in a video before, it's almost symbolic and beautiful in a sense, that the person who would go on to be one of the most strongest for the Zenin, maybe the strongest ever, is the one who didn't have a curse technique. And a little side note that's even more funny is that the dude who did that, who didn't have the curse technique, would then go on to produce a kid who might have the most valuable curse technique in Megumi, who then ended up kind of being the leader actually. So it's like double whammy in a sense, but it's just kind of funny. But basically, he gains this ability to fight back. He's felt like after a certain point, he's withheld by the family. And I've said before that the story of Toji is a very hit home story for someone who feels like their family just doesn't like them, or they're seen as a black sheep. So for people who have that sort of vibe, they relate to Toji. And Toji wants to break free from this, but he finally gains the power that allows him to do it. He probably has been wanting to leave, but if we think about the clan, they probably wouldn't have let him leave. But as such, he gains an ability that allows him to leave, because you have to think about this. They probably tried to stop him, which means that some dudes probably lost their lives. And they learned that, okay, just let him go. But the beauty in his ability is that it kind of really just, I don't want to swear, but it pooped on the whole ideology of the Zenin, because you have this dude who becomes the most strongest ever, but he's not using a curse technique, and he just walks out of there. He just pooped on their entire ideology. It's so interesting because his power is just, not that he's Hulk, but it's just brute strength. There's no finesse to it in a sense, considering all of the work that probably goes into the clan in terms of perfecting their techniques and valuing them and studying them. This dude just left because he's like really strong and fast. That is ultimately the point where Toji reaches his goal. He's able to leave and he can be free and do what he wants. But then something happens. He doesn't know what to do. As you can see, he goes on a bunch of different adventures and certain things, and it seems as though he's still a Zenin, because the funny thing about Toji, if Toji maybe is given a better life or a similar life, he could have ended up like any Zenin. But you can see in the way that he moves, this is not no sweethearts. As we know, he was literally hunting a bunch of high schoolers or teenagers. He's not some sweetheart dude, but he wants the good things in life. If the Zenin clan gave him those things when he was younger, he might have stayed. But either way, when he leaves, he still has a bit of that Zenin in him. And fun fact, as we know, he kind of bargained and used Megumi, which is kind of interesting because it shows you that in his mind, even though he fought against them, there's a part of his brain that still believes in the Zenin clan, because Megumi is the perfect symbol for what they believe. He literally destroyed their ideology by leaving because of his own abilities, but then gave them their golden child. And in a sense, you have to wonder if he still, a part of him believes in what the Zenin clan do. He just didn't like the way they treated him. And as such, as you can see, Megumi is bargained, and if anything happens to him, he was going to end up going there, which means that he believes that eventually his son would be better off in that system, which is kind of messed up. But he still believes that his son, if things work out, which they eventually do because he becomes the head, will end up being in a good position, because that's what the clan believes anyway, which is interesting. But when you watch him live his life, Toji just did not know what to do after that point. In his heart, he was still a Zenin. He didn't necessarily live up to what the freedom was supposed to be, and I think that it shows it's harder at times to really achieve something and know what to do next. He really just carried on being a Zenin even though he left the Zenin, because if you think about it, all of the nasty things that Toji does when he's free, he could have done that while still being a Zenin. Given the fact that all of the dark and nasty things a Zenin clan member can do, Toji would have done the same thing. And the hard thing that you kind of realize about Toji is that he ended up just living his life for cheap thrills. A lot of his decisions didn't always make sense, and this is why people joke and say he's just a bum or just this dude who doesn't think well. It's true, he didn't know what to do after a certain point, because it's very clear that within his mind, the thing that he broke away from is what he believes in and thinks of in a certain extent. But because he was mistreated, something within him is telling him that that's not the right way, but he doesn't know what to do. And ultimately, when we think of Toji, by the end of the day, this is one of the most beautiful stories of a man who broke free from a family that did not accept him, which was a beautiful thing. He literally brute force broke out of those shackles, but he always had them on. And when you think of the man he became outside of it, he was no different than some of the people that he was supposed to apparently not be like. And as such, you can see that ultimately, by the time he ended his life, he was a man who just was looking for a reason to live. He never truly found it. In a sense, Gojo did him a favor, because he would have ultimately started doing certain things that maybe would have even reduced his reputation even more, because think about it to a certain degree. What he did in that situation, in terms of Gojo and also just trying to stop his specific target, not Gojo, it shows you that he's gotten to such a low as a person. This is a man who has a child who will go after another child. And it makes you think that at a certain point, he was willing to do anything now to just almost feel alive, but also feel like he had a purpose. And it's very clear that his upbringing and the way that he thought about things still remained. If you put Toji the way he was outside, back in the clan, he would have fit in perfectly. This is a man who basically does things based on the fact that he's powerful and he will do what he wants. And if you have a problem, challenge him. Look at most of the Zenin dudes. They think the same way. But unfortunately, he is this rebel in a sense, and he's this person who can never be fully accepted. Even if he went back, they were never going to fully accept him. And in a dark way, you might think of the fact that because he gave back Megumi, or was willing to give back Megumi, a part of him almost wanted Megumi to possibly live a life that he never experienced. A life where he would have been the one, where he would have been favored, where he would have felt like a proper Zenin. But because of his abilities and what he became, he was never going to be fully accepted. He is a good person in some aspects, but also he's a bad person. And ultimately, this is why he ends up really being a villain, but he's a cool villain and a dude who knows right from wrong, I guess, when it benefits him, like with Megumi. But generally speaking, he's evil for a reason. He's a person who preferred something that's bad, but the problem is things just never worked out in the way they could have. Because if they did, he would have been one of the greatest Zenin, but for the bad reasons. And that's why I think his story is such a beautiful story of a contradiction, considering what he represents to the clan and how he's viewed. But also in terms of once he achieved this goal, he just could never truly figure out what was next, because I don't think his real goal was to ever leave the clan and be so different from the clan, because a part of him really was still within the clan. Well, that's what I think. Next video, I'm gonna have fun, so maybe I'm gonna do an Endeavor video if anyone's interested. But yeah, that's pretty much it.